Please be seated. You know, some weeks, let me clarify that, some weeks I believe that I have the greatest job in the world. Not every week, but some weeks. And I say that because I think maybe more so than the average person, I have an opportunity to see God work in the world. I have an opportunity to see how, when I decide on a sermon topic, which I usually do by Sunday or Monday, how the rest of the week just kind of works out and how you see God inserting ideas and illustrations and examples of His Word into my week. And each and every week, it happens all the time. Sue and I have talked about it. The final song today, again. We don't even talk about the songs. They just work. They just work. And so I feel that I'm incredibly lucky, and this week was maybe as much as any week, an example of how God will send you a message if you are just willing to listen. That's the key, people. Just be willing to listen. And see how God works in your life. Be open-minded that it's not always going to be this audible word, that it's going to be sometimes through other people, through other events. But I promise you, if you've ever had any doubt if God is real, God is real. And God is with us this morning. And so having said all of that, I kind of have to lay a foundation for what I'm going to talk about today, which is unfinished business. Unfinished business. That's the business that we should have finished, but we just haven't gotten around to it. That's the business that we should be doing, but we're doing something else. That's the business that God is calling us to do, but we really don't want to do it. So as I begin this topic of unfinished business, I have to tell you something about our God, and that is that our God is something that is called immutable. Immutable. Everybody say immutable. Now, immutable has as its root word the word mute. And that comes from the Latin mutus, which means silent. Silent. So if we said we had a mutable God, we would say that we have a silent God. But when we say that we have an immutable God, that means that God never stops talking. He's like that girl at the office, right? Or maybe the guy, I don't want to be biased. That person that never stops talking, and I truly believe that that is the way God is, that God never, ever stops talking. You'll read in the Bible, and there's theologians that believe that there was 400 years of silence between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I think people just tuned him out. I think it's kind of like a shortwave radio that if you're not on the right frequency, you just don't hear God. Our God is constantly talking to each and every one of you. Your God is talking to each and every one of you. You just have to adjust your dial so that you're on the right frequency so that you can hear God. And as I said earlier, don't always be waiting for this audible, booming voice that's going to make everything stand still. Sometimes it's through a friend. Sometimes it's through something that's on TV. Sometimes, and we'll talk about this way later, it's through something that happens in the world. God does speak. Our God is immutable. Now, along with being immutable, our God is unchanging. Our God never, ever, ever, ever changes. He never has. I know this is hard to wrap your mind around, but God has always been. There never was a time before God. And since that time, however long ago it is, God has never, ever changed. Not one little bit. He's not like us. He doesn't grow old, and he doesn't get wrinkles, and he doesn't, one day he can do something, and the next day he can't. You young people will know what that's like in a few years. God never, ever changes. And now that's hard to believe, because especially if we've read the Bible, you look at the angry God of the Old Testament, and you look at the gracious God of the New Testament. Let me tell you that the only difference is Jesus Christ. God hates sin just as much today as he did 2,000 years ago or 4,000 years ago. God has never, ever changed one bit. And most important to us today, and the point that I really, really want to key in on, is that God never changes his mind. God does not use the woman's prerogative, right? What that means to us then, what that means to us is if God calls us, God never, ever, ever stops calling us. And if God gifts us, God never, ever takes those gifts back. So you have been called and you have been gifted, and it's for the entirety of your life. And so you have unfinished business. Now I want to illustrate this through the story of Moses. The story of Moses. We all know the story of Moses, but we're going to kind of go through the story of Moses, and I want you to see how Moses' business is never unfinished. And I also am going to bring out some of the excuses, I'll interject those, that Moses probably would have used along the way as God spoke to him. So, as we know, Moses was born a Jewish child, and he was born during the time of captivity in Egypt. His parents, Amram and Jochebed, they were Jewish parents. Now, at this particular time, there was a prophecy that had been prophesied 430 years before the birth of Moses. Moses just didn't show up, and God decided, oh yeah, let me pick Moses. And that's what I want you to know about God in your life. Moses knew, or God knows and knew what he wanted you to do long before you were ever born. Think about that. And for some of us, he's still waiting on for us to accomplish his business. So 430 years before Moses is born, God gives this prophecy. He's talking to Abram. That's Abraham before he was Abraham. Know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs and will serve them. And they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge. Afterward they shall be led out with great possessions. And so along comes Moses. And Moses is that man that's going to lead them out of captivity. Now Pharaoh, who's the leader of Egypt, he knows about this prophecy. And so he takes matters into his own hands and he says, well, if this man's going to be born that's going to lead these people out of captivity, I'll fix them. I'll just simply kill every Jewish boy that comes along. And that's what he did. He began to kill little Jewish boys. Now, Moses' parents knew this was going to happen, and so they took Moses as soon as he was born, and they put him in this little basket that had tar pitch on the outside, and they set him afloat in the Nile. Now, the Bible kind of makes it seem like it was just by luck that the Pharaoh's daughter is right downstream, but I mean, you have to imagine that if it was just right downstream, they knew exactly what they were doing, especially since Moses' mother actually worked for the Pharaoh's daughter. So, they set Moses afloat. The Pharaoh's daughter finds Moses and takes him in as his own. And she raises him as her own child. But wait, Moses was raised as an Egyptian child. Moses was brought up in Egyptian ways, in Egyptian cultures, and Egyptian values, and more than likely, Egyptian religion. And for 40 years, Moses was an Egyptian. For all rights and purposes, he was not a Jew. But something inside of Moses told him that there was more. And so after 40 years of kind of treading water here in Egypt, not really accomplishing anything, maybe waiting for ascension to the throne, who knows, he's just kind of doing his thing. He's out walking around and he sees this Egyptian soldier beating this Jewish slave. And something inside of him snaps. And he says, I can't take it anymore. And so he kills that Egyptian soldier. Well, Moses knows that his time's up in Egypt, that even he, the Pharaoh's kind of son, however you want to put that, won't be able to get away with that. So he runs. He runs, and there's a bigger picture here. Moses is not just running from Egypt, Moses is running from his destiny. Moses runs, and he hides. Scripture actually says he goes into Midian and becomes a Midianite. So now, make sure we follow this. He was a Jew. Then he became an Egyptian. And now he's in Midian and he becomes a Midianite. He takes on Midianite cultures and values and religions. He actually takes a Midianite wife and he has 2 children. Everything about Moses is now about Midian. 40 years goes by. 40 years goes by with Moses in Midian. He is now 80 years old. Some of us are 80 years old, and some of us that are 80 years old think that, well, kind of done our thing, kind of put in our time. But it's at 80 years of age that God comes to Moses. That God says, Moses, you have unfinished business. Now think about what Moses has done. Moses has tried to hide in Midian. Moses has done his best to hide in Egypt. And all along, God is just what? Being patient. God is patient with us, even though we do everything possible to avoid his calling. 80 years of Moses' life was spent running, spent doing other things, spent seeing other people and worshiping other gods and not following God's calling and God's plan. Now the message to us today, and I know I'm speaking to somebody out there, the message to us today is that no matter how old you are or how young you are, God has a plan for you. And God will never give up on that plan. And God is constantly talking to you. Something motivated Moses to kill that Egyptian soldier. Something inside of him said, I'm something more than an Egyptian. And when he was in Midian, again, I'm taking leeway with the scripture, I just don't believe that he felt like he was where he was supposed to be. And I talk to a lot of you over and over again, and I know that you don't feel necessarily like you're where you're supposed to be. So I'm encouraging you today to listen to the immutable God, the God who never stops talking, the God who wants you to complete what he put you on this earth to do, the God who wants you to use your calling, wants you to use your talents, the God who just wants you to listen to him. And so Moses here is 80 and he's carrying on in his life, and suddenly this bush catches fire. Now, it's not unusual for a bush to have caught fire in that topography, if you will, that geography, that place of the world. It's warm, it's a desert-like atmosphere, spontaneous combustion, a dry bush, not a big deal. But here's the big deal about the bush is that the bush did not burn up. The bush was not consumed. And so often when we read through that scripture, we gloss right by the bush. We go right by the bush and all we hear is God's voice. Well, the bush spoke, or the angel spoke, or whatever it was, and who cares about the bush? But let me tell you how important the bush is. The bush is incredibly important because what the bush signifies is that God has taken something that is temporary, a temporary bush, and with his power, he has made it do something that it could not do on its own. It remained a fire without being consumed. And so for those of us who think that we're not good enough, or we're not smart enough, or we're too old, or we're too young, or we've done too many things bad in the past, or we're not educated, or whatever it is, and that you can't be used by God, the symbolism of that bush is that God can take just a bush and by putting his divine power into it, make it amazing and strong. Make it do things that it could not do. But there's a catch to that. There's a catch to that. It's not enough to listen to God, and it's not enough to know that God is powerful. We have to as well honor and worship God. We have to humble ourselves before the God who is speaking to us, before the God who can give us the power, before we can finish our business. And that's why God speaks to Moses and he says, Moses, remove your sandals because the ground on which you stand is holy ground. You see, what's happening here is Moses is making a transition from the life he lived, from the choices he made, from the mistakes he was a part of, and now he's stepping into God's plan. At 80 years of age, he is finally going to finish the business that God brought him on this earth to do. And God wants him to know that it's only with God that he's going to be able to do this. So remove those sandals, Moses. And then the scripture says that Moses dropped to his knees. He worshiped God. He humbled himself before God. He was willing to let go of everything that he knew for those 80 years, and he was willing to listen to God. Now, I've talked to a lot of you, and my wife talks to me. We're not always willing to listen, are we? In fact, sometimes we're pretty stubborn. Okay, I'll just speak for myself. Sometimes I'm pretty stubborn. I spent 30-some years of my life doing it my way, and I didn't get anywhere. But when you are willing to listen, when you believe that God has the power, and you are willing to humble yourself, now God can finally use you for what He put you on this earth to do. Everything that Moses accomplished up to this point really didn't matter. And in your life, everything that you've accomplished up to this point really doesn't matter if it's not in line with God's plan. And here's the thing I want you to know. Sometimes we equate our godliness with our success. I mean, look at Moses. Moses was a respected man in Midian. He was a respected man in Egypt. He had power, he had prestige, he had a wife, he had sons, he had money, he had flocks. But you know what? It is possible to be hugely successful in all the wrong ways. I don't care how rich you are or how powerful you are or what position you hold at church or how respected you are in the community or what you've accomplished academically. If it's not what God has called you to do, it doesn't matter. You can be successful in all the wrong ways, and God is still up there going, will you please just listen to me? Well, Moses decides to listen to God. And this is really the beginning of an adventure, and this is really the hard part, because first God says, I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to address that Pharaoh, which, I know he wants to kill you because you killed one of his soldiers. I know they're out to get you, and I know that the Israelites, they don't like you either. I want you to go back to that place where all that trouble began. I want you to walk into a firestorm, Moses. I don't know about you, but I imagine Moses is saying, God done lost his mind. I mean, really, if God came to you and a bush started burning in your yard and said, hey, Chuck, I want you to sell all your business and I want you to buy a motorhome and live out back. Or David, quit your job. Well, David would quit his job. Or whatever you do, if God said just give it all up. Everything that you've worked your entire life to achieve, give it all up. Because here's my plan. 80 years of age, and here's my plan, Moses. I got unfinished business for you. So he says, I want you to go back. And so Moses goes back, and we know that story, and he talks to the Pharaoh and the plagues and all that bad stuff and all that good stuff, and he leads the people out, and now Moses sits down on a rock and says, whoo, I'm done. Nope. 40 more years of wandering in the desert. 40 more years of wandering in the desert. 40 more years of being used by God and not ever really seeing the fruits of it. Think about this, people. Moses died at 120 years of age and never stepped foot in the promised land. He was used by God for the benefit of other people. Oh boy. You mean I won't have a plaque on my wall, God? I won't have a big bank account? I won't have cars in my garage? But that was Moses' unfinished business. 120 years of his life, 80 of it took before he'd even listened to God. And the message to you is, God has something in plan for you. I truly and honestly believe that if you're still here today, breathing, and I assume everyone is, then God has something left for you to do. Your job is not done. There is no I'm too young, or there is no I've done my duty, I've spent my time, I've been there, done that, it's somebody else's turn. No. Our lives, the entirety of our lives are unfinished business. Up until that day that we go to be with Jesus, we have unfinished business. And God only knows what your unfinished business is. Maybe you're going to do great things for somebody. Maybe you're going to be in a position that you never could have imagined you would ever be in. Something you weren't prepared to do. Remember, Moses stuttered. And yet he was called to go speak to the highest man in the land. God has got a plan for each and every one of you. And God's plan isn't finished until God says it's finished. So I want each of you to have a renewed vigor, a renewed hope for life. Whatever you're going through right now, I promise you, it will pass if you begin to listen to God. And if you're in a place where you don't think you should be, start to listen to God. It's never too late to start over. It's never too late to have a new you. We just saw that with Dakota, the new Dakota. He looks a whole lot like the old Dakota, but it's the new Dakota. I thought maybe he was going to let me shave his head or something. I'm joking with you. The new you is just waiting to be born. Our God is constantly talking to you, and he has unfinished business for you. Now, if I could get you to turn the slide, please. There's just one slide. I thought that I would finish up with this thought. Now, give me a minute. This is not a politically based speech here, but just stick with me for a minute and see if you can draw anything out of what I say. Donald Trump was elected president on Tuesday. Oh, I was expecting a big round of applause. Really, no, that's not what I wanted. But here's the story. Let's look at Donald Trump's life. And I don't think there's a single person in here that would admit that Donald Trump is probably not the best person to serve as president of the United States. I mean, I think I said this last week. However, hundreds of millions of people in the United States, we had Hillary and Donald. I mean, come on. I would have voted for Vanessa or Elliot long before either of them. But anyway, think about this. Unfinished business. Donald Trump has made his entire life wheeling and dealing, selling and buying, and he's gone bankrupt. And he's done some great things, you know. I mean, he's done some great things in New York. He turned a rundown hotel into economy apartments that is now running. And he took a skating rink that the city of New York couldn't figure out. And hey, he had The Apprentice and Celebrity Apprentice, right? Great TV, right? No applause there, huh? But what if, and here's my question, and I'll shut up and get out of your way. What if Donald Trump's unfinished business was to be president of the United States? Sure, he's probably not educated in the right ways. He's probably not experienced in the right ways. But hey, look at Moses. What if Donald Trump was put on this earth to be elected president, the 45th president of the United States, to take office January 20th, 2017, and to change the tide of our country? What if? And what if you have unfinished business that you're not allowing yourself to complete because you won't listen to God? I mean, I don't know what motivated Donald Trump. He's got an ego the size of all of New York, we know that, but he also claims to be a religious man. I don't know. What if that's his calling? What if that's his purpose? And if it's not, it doesn't matter because God will have his way anyway. God has a plan for each and every one of you. Unfinished business, people. Let us pray. Father God in heaven, we thank you for this day together in your church. We thank you for the music. We thank you for the baptism. I thank you for all these people in attendance. And the message comes out today that each of us, if we're still here, has something to do. And so I pray for each person out there that they consider this message and that they look at their lives and they start listening to your immutable ways. And it is through Jesus Christ that we pray. Amen. And so I told you that Sue and I never talk about the songs. And here, lo and behold, our final song is Build Your Kingdom Here. Dakota, we built a little bit of kingdom there. God called us today with a message to go out and build a little bit of kingdom. Figure out what part of the kingdom we are and how we can build that kingdom. There's only a certain amount of time left, people. Be part of the building. Please stand. This is a really slow-paced song, so you should be able to keep up.
To rule and reign in our hearts again. Increase in us, we pray. Unveil why we're made. Come set our hearts ablaze with hope, like wildfire in our very souls. Holy Spirit, come invade us now. We are your church. We need your power in us. We seek your kingdom first. We hunger and we thirst. Refuse to waste our lives, for you're our joy and prize. To see the captive hearts released, the hurt, the sick, the poor at peace. We lay down our lives for heaven's cause. We are your church. We pray, revive this earth. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here, we pray. Unleash your kingdom's power, reaching the near and far. No force of hell can stop your beauty changing hearts. You made us for much more than this. Awake the kingdom seed in us. Fill us with the strength and love of Christ. We are your church. We are the hope on earth. Build your kingdom here. Let the darkness fear. Show your mighty hand. Heal our streets and land. Set your church on fire. Win this nation back. Change the atmosphere. Build your kingdom here, we pray.
I want to thank you all for being here today. I hope you had a great service. I had a good time. We don't like to let anybody leave without a very special message, though.
Yes.
Yes.
Community Church, we like to give everyone an opportunity to love and accept Jesus Christ. So will you please raise your right hand and read our benediction? Let us
Go forth into the world in peace and dedicated to your service, O Lord. Let us hold fast to that which is good. Render to no person evil for evil. Strengthen the faint-hearted. Support the weak. Help the needy and the afflicted. And honor all people. Let us love and serve the Lord, rejoicing in the power of His Spirit. And may the peace of the Lord be with you.